One way that I like to add some imagery and pattern and texture to my work is to do carving. Now, carving works best on a leather hard piece. If you try to carve on your work while it's wet, particularly if it's something that you've thrown, it's not going to hold its form. You're going to end up warping it. So wait till your piece gets to leather hard, and then when you're carving, you can get really nice clean cut lines. So first thing you want to do is look at your tools that you have available to you. These are an assortment of tools that I have in my studio that I use. This one I don't use too much, mainly for wheel work. This one occasionally I'll use it for some carving. This one has a really nice sharp edge, so I love to use that one. And these little mini ribbon sculpting sets. These are just miniature trim tools, but they are fantastic for adding any sort of detail, any carving work that you want to do. So this is actually my favorite one. It's a little rectangle one. And so I'm just going to show you what you can do with the different tools. Obviously, the bigger the tool, the bigger the mark it makes. So this, it gives me a small, well, a medium-sized groove. This end is going to give me a much wider groove. It actually, because it's such a big tool, it's hard to apply even pressure to it. So it's making a very shallow tool. So it has sort of subtle edges to it. I've got this tool, which is going to cut little rectangular shapes. The rounded side, again, pretty much mimics this one. Maybe it's a little bit more shallow. I've got this side of this tool, and then this side I like because again, it's smaller. It can get a little bit deeper. I feel like I have a little bit more control when I use it, but this creates more of like a V cut. This creates more of a rounded cut. Same thing with all these tools. You have your choice between rounds. So let's see if I want to do something like that. But don't forget, I mean, it's not just about lines. It's about creating small shapes too. So I can create small repetitive patterns. Here's my favorite one. I can use the corner to create grooves. I can use the flat portion here, create more of a squared off part, and then again, repeated work. So, oops, sorry about that, nudge the camera. So how are you going to use carving? What are you going to do? One thing about carving is that it is a subtractive method, meaning that you're taking material away. It can be difficult to put it back. So usually when I'm doing carving, I like to sketch things out with a pencil first. And pencil, it burns away in the kiln. That's fantastic. And it also can act as a carving tool. Like I can feel there's a little texture there. It made a little bit of a groove. So I'm just going to show you kind of quickly one way that I can create some imagery that has some texture and therefore adds some visual interest to my work. So I've put this cypress tree shape in here, and what I'm doing is I'm just carving around that shape. I'm going to make kind of a nice deep groove all the way around it. And now you got to be careful if your piece is kind of thin, you can go through it. So be cautious about that. Okay, so I made this deep groove around it. Now I'm going to take the flat side of this tool, or you could take that I don't know what to call this side. It's not rectangular, triangular, this flat edge versus the round side. And I'm just kind of going along that groove that I made, and I'm trying to mediate between the deep groove and then the top portion of my clay. So I'm sort of trying to get this to set itself apart without just relying on that deep groove. Okay. So there, I've kind of set that apart now. Now I can go back in and I can start making repetitive marks. And with these repetitive marks, I can sort of highlight imagery, but I can also create direction. So just by making tiny marks, repetitive marks, I have this suggestion of direction, and hopefully you're picking up on the imagery now. Maybe not, it's a little rough. But trying to suggest here is perhaps Van Gogh's Starry Night, how through the use of paint he was able to create direction. Well, it was those short brush strokes that did that sort of activated it, and you can activate the surface too by using short carving marks. Okay. So maybe with a little bit more work, that'll become clearer, and maybe with some glaze, that'll help things to pop a little bit. But the other thing about carving, so we can do just textural things, we can do patterns, but we really can create imagery. So on this little cup, I started doing a relief. It's called bas relief, and it's actually B-A-S is the bas part, bas relief, of an apple tree. So I did the same method as I did here. I started by sketching, there's a lemon on the other side, sketching out my imagery, and then I went back with the corner of my tool and carved away a groove around it to make it stand out from the rest of the piece. And now as you're doing this, you want to think about, I've got a leaf that's going over the apple. I need to think about the difference in depth between where the leaf is and where the apple is. Now it can't be very deep. I want you to think about a penny and the relief that's on there. That's a very shallow space, but they're able to give you a lot of information, you know, right down to the point that you understand where Lincoln's temples are and the texture of his hair. So you need to sort of evaluate what things are closer to you and what things are further. And by doing that, you can suggest volume and you can suggest space. So yes, my leaf goes over my lemon. So I'm going to carve a deep line kind of through my lemon. But I've got that same deep line going all around my lemon as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of feather in this edge of the lemon so that it doesn't have that groove anymore. It starts to now put the lemon behind the leaf. So carving like this in this bas relief, it takes a good eye for detail and an understanding of depth. But with a little bit of patience, you can pick it up and you can illustrate depth, and you can explain how the leaf is in front of the apple, but the other leaf is behind it. So it's just a matter of thinking about space and sort of crunching it all and doing it in a shallower space. So think about grabbing your trim tools and using them for carving. Think about creating patterns, think about creating imagery, and see what you can come up with.